The 6th annual season of the Overwatch League is well underway. Through a gauntlet of opening week matches, we have gotten a taste of what some of the most and least exciting rosters are currently capable of. It was a fairly long week with a lot of games, and not everybody has time to watch all of them, or maybe you just came here to hear my thoughts on the games. Either way, you've come to the right place. This is going to be a recap and a partial review of Week 1. Today I thought I'd do an experiment. Let's bring back those recaps that I did during the Pro-Am, as those were generally well received, so let's give this a shot to see if it's something you want to see weekly. Bare minimum, the start of a new season is always worth talking about, so let's give this week a go and go from there. Toronto Defiant versus San Francisco Shock. Two brand new rosters clashing on opening day, and it failed to disappoint. The Battle of Contenders Dynasties proved to be a good one. What's crazy is Toronto actually maintained control of this series for quite some time, with people like Ultraviolet and Hydron just going off over and over again. The Shock actually found themselves on the back foot as Defiant took 2 straight maps and went to match point, and were pretty much winning for most of push. The Shock were trying literally everything they could, but the execution generally was pretty sloppy. But of course, in typical Shock/O2 Blast fashion, they pulled out a random comeback out of their butts with a buzzer beater victory on push, followed by some insane adjustments on Oasis to take the series. Defiant are definitely kicking themselves for this one, as Hydron in that map 5 got hunted down time after time, pretty much being ineffective. Literally half of the Shock were searching far and wide for this dude to scout him out as the Sombra. Proper and Heesang really stepped up their game, so credit goes where it's due in that regard. This damage line showed massive potential, and it'll surely make the Shock fans excited for what's to come. Washington Justice versus London Spitfire. This 4-map series was not all that close. The Spitfire got off to a slow start, as the Justice kinda diffed them in most, if not all, places. Every map the Justice won, they were firmly in control of. London really had no answer for the power of alexyOWL, and it was a brutal beatdown on that London backline. London looked super uncomfortable. The Justice were far more flexible throughout the series, which ultimately is why they had such an overwhelming advantage. Mir may have less experience than Hadi, at the tank role at least, but he's far more flexible, and you gotta give him credit for how he played, because right now he is showing why he is the starter on this team. Sadly for London, those dive-centric compositions were giving them a lot of trouble. There were a lot of whiffed EMPs, the backline couldn't stay alive, nobody was doing anything right, and things got especially bad whenever there was a lack of Admiral and or Sparker in the lineup. The one map the Spitfire managed to win this series was an absolute clown fiesta out of Washington, pretty lucky if you ask me, as they thought it was a bright idea to sub in Mirror at flex support and have Teru play Brig. Like, what? Why is Teru your best Brig player? What the Justice were doing just felt weird, and the execution on both sides was awful. I haven't been that boomed watching an individual map in a long time. Thank God the Justice came back to their senses after this, because London already played poorly enough as it was. If we had to endure an entire series like this, I'm pretty sure we all would have went blind. Regardless, really good start for Washington in the new year. Vancouver versus Florida. Honestly, the scoreline doesn't do it justice. This was a very close set. It didn't start off that way as Mayhem rolled the first 2 maps, but then the Titans made some nice adjustments on Havana by putting their help more so onto Punk. Not to mention that Sugar Free had an excellent Genji performance to give them a good boost of energy. It was this kind of performance that gave the team the inspiration needed to make this a series as they woke up for push. I mean, there was a minute left to go, and the Titans not just had the bot all the way in their territory with checkpoint captured and all, but they mostly looked like the better team on this map. But of course, in the 11th hour, we're not allowed to have nice things or good upsets as they finally ran out of steam. Punk had just gotten grabbed during the last real organized fight of the series, but then his team died before he could really use it. The Titans kind of choked this map away, and it's not just because of some of the last fights. Generally, there were a couple of moments where they could have significantly increased their lead, but they failed every single time, either due to bad execution or Merit just absolutely carrying the Mayhem. Either way, the Titans at the end of the day did put up a really good fight against one of the better teams in the league, and it's this kind of performance that gives you hope as a Vancouver fan. Hopefully we get more of this for the rest of the season. NYXL versus Atlanta Reign. Despite the 3-0, I'd say NYXL actually made the maps somewhat close. Psycho, Fitz, Kellen, they all did what they could to make this a series, and I think early on, the backline had some great peel for Kellen, and that enabled him and the DPS to make a difference. New York at least looked okay, and made this game not boring, but when considering who else the Reign had to prepare for this week, it makes you wonder how much they actually cared. Some uncharacteristic mistakes by Lip and Chio make you feel this way, because it kind of felt like the Reign either underestimated their opponents or are focusing a lot more on their other opponent, which we'll cover a bit later. Because when this team actually did try, whenever things were looking somewhat dire, they exposed the NYXL's backline big time, and Lip was able to farm EMPs like no tomorrow. A good team beat a bad one, nothing else to say. Houston versus LA. Now this was a statement win by the Houston Outlaws. If you want proof that they learned from their mistakes in that Pro-Am matchup, then look no further. This was the exact opposite of their previous meeting. In the Pro-Am, Gladiators could finish maps in the clutch and in those final fight territories, but the Outlaws made sure no such thing was possible this time. They did a really good job of not just playing a lot more organized with their dive, but also snuffing out Kevster and not allowing him to take over this series. Whenever the Gladiators were nearing the finish line, the tandem of Happy and Shu came alive. Big EMPs put the Glads in ruin, and Shu was on fire basically from start to finish. He was literally 1v2ing as Ana in the backline at one point. You could tell this one meant a lot to Houston with how hard they tried, and they showed us exactly why they truly are a top team on paper with how much their talent thrived, along with the much improved gameplay. Gladiators were a good testing ground early on for them, and they passed with flying colors. Vancouver Titans versus LA Valiant. I mean, yeah. There's not much to say usually when the Valiant are in the lobby. We know this team is not going to be winning many games, if any at all this year. The Titans are in a way better place, and that showed with the final results. The only real highlight of this game was the egregious C9 on Junkertown. That was probably one of the worst we've ever seen. Although I have to say, the Valiant did show some signs of life in the first two maps. They didn't just take it laying down, which I can really appreciate. The Titans did not get those maps for free by any means, and I think the Valiant's carefree attitude is really showing why they're playing better than a team like Vegas. For now, it's all just potential though. Maybe eventually this could translate into some map wins. Speaking of Vegas, their matchup against Washington is the next to talk about, and, well, this game was terrible. The Justice were practically playing with their food. It was a non-stop bully fest for 3 straight maps. And the only reason this game wasn't a total snoozer was because FD God played Lifeweaver for 1, and 2, Teru got a random spy check onto Sombra with this super random, out-of-nowhere hipfire shot that had us convinced he was probably hacking. Aside from that, just an overall lifeless performance from the Eternal that shows us they might be a free win all season for every single team in the league unless some major changes happen. Houston versus the Valiant. From one snoozer to the next, I suppose. We all knew the result before it was going to happen. It's literally one of the top teams versus the very bottom. This is a nice 3-0 to add to your map differential. If you didn't watch this one, you really didn't miss anything. Unless you're a Houston fan, there probably weren't any highlights you cared about. The only thing that made this game remotely entertaining for a short while were the Valiant playing Junker Queen Torb and Pelican's insane Genji mechanics. Other than that, not much is worth highlighting. New York versus Boston. This was a good testing ground to see where the so-called troubled Boston Uprising stood. All these rumors about them being tilted recently came out, and this was their chance to prove to the rest of the world and all their haters that there are no problems in Boston. Cue that Avatar meme, baby. In all seriousness, they answered the hate and they took care of business. Now, to be fair, with how the series started, you may have thought otherwise, as Lijiang was dangerously close to falling into New York's lap, and it was perhaps a C9 away from actually happening since Boston played some very lackluster and weird gameplay with people like Smurf just holding W on the Reinhardt and not caring about anything in the world. This was the kind of map that makes you think maybe there are some problems, but after that initial demon was conquered, Boston never really looked back as Decay was running all over the rest of the NYXL with a crazy good day on the Tracer, and New York's backline was just getting picked time after time after time, with what I'd like to add some very weird miscommunication between Creative and the rest of the group. This dude was literally in Narnia. The NYXL simply got exposed as a bad team, and they have a lot of things they need to to fix. As for Boston, right now at least, it seems that they're safe. They may have sold their souls to the devil to make this team, but payment shall come another time, and that time may not be anytime soon, with a relatively weak strength of schedule on the horizon. San Francisco Shock versus Atlanta Reign. This one was kinda surprising. The Reign winning isn't necessarily a shocker, but how they did it is what truly stands out. To 3-0 a potential rival team in convincing fashion like this is a statement way to start your year. Every time the Shock won a fight, the Reign canceled their momentum completely. Proper was not allowed to get hot. He did well at times for sure, but Lip was finding just as much value, and the rest was kinda just a team diff. This is the type of game that'll make Western fans realize that Lip is truly the real deal. He is at the same level as Proper, and very well could win the MVP over him if he continues to make this kind of impact. When he can torment an entire team and cancel out Proper like this, it gives you high hopes if you're an Atlanta fan. The Shock players simply needed to play in better unison and other guys had to step up, but they usually failed, especially with the backline as they had quite a difficult time keeping up with the pace of Chio and Fielder. Now, in all fairness to the Shock, they are operating supposedly on little practice, and they did just arrive in America recently, and maybe the next time could be a lot closer, but as of right now, there is no doubt in anybody's minds that the Reign are far superior in this kind of meta, and that the Shock definitely have their work cut out for them. Dynasty versus Infernal. The first ever Battle for Soul went about as well as you could have hoped. It was arguably the best game of this week, with the OGs narrowly winning it out in a game they probably should have lost. Generally speaking, there was great play from both sides. There was a lot of chaos throughout the set, with most maps feeling close. Whenever one team was in control, the other flipped the script. It had exactly what you were looking for in a city rivalry, and it could be how we fill the void once held by the Battle of LA all those years ago. As for why this game got so crazy, it all came down to Oasis, where Infernal kind of gave this thing away. Infernal had every single reason to win map 5, but they choked away 2, not just 1, but 2 huge leads on 2 consecutive rounds. They just needed to win 1 fight, and they could not do it. Poor ult usage, failed execution, it was a disaster. In spirit of Philly seemingly, they failed to clutch up. And you already know, if you're not gonna clutch up, Prophet certainly will. Oh, and apparently Bellows Rhea too. Shout out to him and his insane Doom clutch against his former team. Definitely give this round a watch if you haven't already. It was series defining. So much pandemonium. So much back and forth that makes control so fun. Just a really fun round of Overwatch to get the heart rate going. This game was awesome. The Battle of Soul is off to a great start, and it very well might be rivalry of the year with how these two match up on paper, and I'd say that both fan bases got some goods and some bads out of this game. This one goes down in the history books for sure. Honestly, if it weren't for this game, APAC would have been sleeper. Let's talk about Dallas versus Guangzhou. This saw the Fuel get off to their typical slow start under rush at center. This is not the way you want to start your season as the defending champs. Dallas struggled to get much of anything going, as that confidence we're used to seeing simply was not there. The follow-up was lacking a lot of the time, and there was some clear-cut hesitation throughout this entire series, partially in thanks, I'd assume, to a new support line and not having that trust built up yet, and perhaps not having the right composition down yet. They looked uninspirational and not nearly flexible enough on most things that they tried. But honestly, I'm not gonna panic yet if I'm a Dallas fan. They always start off slow, and Guangzhou just might be better than people think. That team deserves a lot of credit for how they played, as everybody was making good contributions. Piggy looked a lot more comfortable in the solo tank role than Hanbin, Choi and Jimmy had a lot of pop-offs, they were doing everything right. It's still early, of course, but perhaps a performance like this one will go to show that people might be sleeping on the charge, including myself. They've got a really nasty core, and they're showing that they don't necessarily need to make changes to compete. Hangzhou Spark versus Shanghai Dragons. Yeah, this one about how you'd expect. Arguably the best team in the region versus arguably the worst. A 3-0 is simply unsurprising. It's cool that Shanghai have a bit more power support thanks to their addition of Iris, and the DPS are of course decent, but they're still too weak to compete with Hangzhou, and the results show. Leave had a very nice debut in a Spark uniform, and Gushue unsurprisingly did more than Fleta thanks to his better Winston and just having better help around him. Speaking of Fletta's tank, that was probably the biggest point of interest in this game since the match itself did not have a lot going for it. If I were to give you a way too early evaluation of Fletta's role swap to tank, I would say that he could look fine on the off-tank heroes, but perhaps struggle on the more traditional main tank heroes. He got caught out a number of times on that Winston and was easily punished at times, but I'd also like to add that it's still early and he deserves more of a chance. But on the other hand, his SIG did show some potential, so maybe all isn't lost if you're a Shanghai fan. Fletta definitely has room to grow, but unfortunately, I don't know if he's going to get it for the simple fact that the help around him just might not be good enough. Shanghai are on track to have their worst season in a very long time, and at this point we can only pray that both Fletta and Gangnam Jin can find more ways to contribute on their new roles. Vegas Eternal versus Florida Mayhem. Yet again, the Eternal looked lifeless. You'd expect their dives to not be coordinated or to be bad at taking space. That stuff's natural for a bad team. But what stands out is the way in which they lost this game. The fact that they were failing against Lifeweaver, one of the worst heroes in the game, is a very alarming sign. And Florida literally played it at least once every single map. They were actually teabagging them through hero picks. They actually played Lifeweaver Mercy at the same time, and it was surprisingly close still. And in other maps, they were straight up winning with the Lifeweaver in their composition, even breaking out fancy platform strats and just having Merit snipe everything that moved. I feel very conflicted after watching this match. On one hand, it's cool that the Mayhem played Lifeweaver. We likely won't see much of him this year, and it made the match a lot more entertaining than it could have been. On the other hand, it says a lot about Vegas if teams are so willing to break out one of the worst possible hero picks on the support role somewhat frequently against them. It makes me fear for them as a franchise and for all of their players as well. They're on track to be a really big laughingstock this year, and I just hope that things don't get too out of hand. London Spitfire versus Boston Uprising. Oh, what could have been. This was a surprisingly decent matchup considering how poorly London played on their first day. They stepped up and they made some noteworthy adjustments. Rather than consistently running into the mirror that they know they can't play as well, they used some anti-dive with Junker Queen and Reaper as well. The only problem was, whenever they didn't play these compositions, they got snowballed big time. Matching Boston's style just did not work in their favor, and that's part of what had them down in the series so quickly. Although, some people might argue the real reason they lost was because of the monumental choke they had on map 4. London were literally in prime position to win this map. Landon was actually doing a good job of shutting down Decay, Backbone Sombra was showing some fast improvement, and when it came to the clutch, they had a real shot in overtime to extend this series and possibly win it. After getting the checkpoint, they were able to take things slow, set themselves up, and then Landon got a super clutch pick onto Decay. And then right after, they killed Smurf, which probably should have been the dagger. In a 5v3 scenario, all they had to do was kill the Brig. Sparker just had to solo blossom Lee Jae-gon instead of waiting until the next game to use his ult, and it might have gone to map 5. But no, he decides to hold it, which then gives Lee Jae-gon enough time to build rally while he's nanoed, becoming a raid boss and somehow turning that fight and closing out the set. If I sound a little salty, it's because I am a little salty. There is no good reason to hold on to Blossom like that for 5 minutes without using it. I get it's not the greatest ult, and there is a chance that they don't kill Brig there and they still lose anyway, but there's no excuse. This was an absolute robbery. A match that so easily could have gone 5 maps was taken away from us. The only plus I'd say is a new meme just got dropped. Lee Jae-gasm has now been put into existence. You're welcome. Nonetheless, Boston survived a week of allegations, and London go back to the drawing board in a very disappointing first week. And finally, Toronto versus Gladiators. This game felt very even on the surface. Gladiators and Defiant have been rated close to each other all offseason, with Defiant having that great synergy and Gladiators having the talent. And when push came to shove, it was talent that prevailed on this day. It was a decent game for sure, but Glads mostly felt like they had it. And honestly, if it weren't for a crazy Hydra on Widow performance, this very well could have been a 3-0. Anytime it felt like Defiant were gaining momentum, Gladiators put them in their place. Take King's Row for example. This thing started off with Defiant finishing the map, but then Glads did it way faster and spanked them in extra rounds. And then, right after winning Junkertown, they get absolutely destroyed on push and basically lost after 3 minutes. Defiant had a very tough time cracking that Yaki-Kevster duo, and I'd say the DPS simply did more on the side of the purple. And that's not even where it ends. Lastro really tore this game wide open, as his Ana was off the rails in this one. The sleep darts, the bionades, they were insane. I mean, a near 60% sleep dart connection rate is absurd at this level. LA's mechanics really shined through in a great bounce back victory to end the week strong. On the other side of things, this was a tough start to Toronto's season for sure. Losing 2 games they know they could have won like this is brutal, and it can definitely affect your mental and your confidence. However, with the bright group of guys they had and how hard they fought, it gives you high hopes that they'll probably start winning more of these as we go on in the future. If they can improve on the execution side of things and give people like Hydron and UV a bit more help, then some of these tough games surely bounce their way. It's not an ideal way to start their season, but their future is still exciting. And that's week 1 in the books, my friends. I hope that you enjoyed this style of video. If you want to see more, please do me a favor and let me know in the comment section, and be sure to hit that like button while you're at it. And if weekly seems like too much, maybe we could do recaps for the important weeks and tournaments instead. Let me know what you think down below. Thank you all for watching this video, I appreciate your support a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.